What's up everybody, Chris from Full Steam Designs. Today we're going back to school with this desk build that features a flip open top and a removable seat for storage. And don't worry if you don't have a shop full of tools, because I'm going to show you multiple ways to cut everything, including a circular saw, a jigsaw, and even a handsaw. So stick around. I'm using cabinet grade plywood for this. Went ahead and bought 2 sheets of it. And I'm just going to start by laying my pattern out. I've got plans for this. You can take a screenshot of this here, and if that's not good enough, I'll put them up on my website and you'll be able to look at them there. You don't have to get this thing absolutely perfect. You just want to make sure that when you cut both sides, they match. And there's a lot of different ways that you can cut this out. I think a circular saw is a great way to do it. Just make sure you're being careful, especially when you're doing these plunge cuts. Now the only issue with a circular saw is you're not going to be able to get those nice sharp edges without cutting into the main body of your material. So you're going to have to come through with something else later on, something like a jigsaw or a pull saw, and I'll show both methods for that. Now the other important thing here is to make sure that you've got something under your material. You don't just want to put this on the ground and cut it. I've got this piece of foam insulation and I'm cutting right into that. And once you've got the first piece cut out, you can use it as a template to trace out the shape for your second one. Now I'm going to leave this side solid, so it's just going to look a little different. It'll add a little bit of strength to this. And I'm coming through with another circular saw here. This is a smaller one, a 3 3/8 inch blade. But again, we end up running into that same problem where it doesn't get those nice sharp edges. So here I am using the pull saw just to clean those up. And now I'm going to go ahead and clamp these 2 pieces together. And what I'm going to do is use this top one as a template. I'm going to use a template bit on my router, this flush trim bit here. And that's just going to make this match to the exact size of that top one. I have a bunch of pieces that I need to be 22.5 inches wide, so I go ahead and cut a couple strips of that. And then out of that, I'll cut the rest of the pieces for my seat box, for the bottom of this, the bottom of my drawer, just all the other pieces besides the sides basically. And I cut them all a little long so I can come back later and trim them up at the correct angle. And I use the sides to trim everything to just the right length. I like doing it this way a lot more instead of trying to come up with exact measurements and cut everything exactly their size. I always just use stuff as a reference, and that has never really failed me. This next part might be a little hard to see. What I'm doing is just loosening up the base of my circular saw, and I'm tilting it until it matches the angle of this side. And that's going to give me the perfect angle for this base piece that I need to cut out. Now that I've got the base, the two sides, and the front cut, I'm going to go ahead and start gluing them together. And then I'll be able to reference this to find the rest of my angles. Clamp that can do over 24 inches is really handy here, just for squeezing stuff together while you're starting to assemble it. And my method for assembling everything on the body of this is going to be to use some wood glue, use some brad nails just to quickly hold everything together. Then I'm going to drill some pilot holes, and then I'm going to install screws to really lock everything together. And I do that on every one of these panels. I make sure I go from the bottom, get all those pieces too, and that's going to make this thing really sturdy. Now this angle here, I have not touched my table saw. This is the same angle that I used on the base. And I just kind of sneak up on that fit, and once I'm happy with it, I'll install that piece. And I'll do the same with that back panel. Next I need to make the drawer bottom. Again, I cut this a little big, and I'm going to use a couple pieces of scrap here to kind of help me hold this. Sometimes it's tough working just by yourself in the shop. You need another set of hands. You can use some scrap material and some clamps, and that'll help you hold pieces where you need it. And again, I'm not really measuring any of these angles. I'm using the case of this itself as a reference. Once I go ahead and sand this, I'm going to use a little bit of Bondo. This is just like what you would use on your car for filling dents and stuff. This is really not the right way to be mixing this. You really should be doing it on like a piece of metal or a piece of plastic. The solvents in this will actually absorb into the plywood before you can get them mixed properly. I just didn't have a piece of metal to use. And they'll give you the proper ratio on the back of how much you mix it, but I kind of just put a glob of the actual gray body filler down, and then a small strip of that blue hardener. And depending on how humid it is and how hot it is, it can make this stuff kick off a little bit quicker. And you may find that you'll mix this up and it'll be hard almost immediately. So you can be a little easy on putting that blue hardener in, especially if you're in a hot and humid area like I am. I've got plenty of plywood left over that I can use to make my top and my seat But I also had this really nice walnut plywood sitting around, and I decided to use this instead. I'm trimming everything down to 24 inches wide, and then I'm going to cut my seat and the two pieces for my top out of that. And I just need a slight angle between the two pieces that are going to be on the top. And you can see that's 9 degrees here. I'm actually using an angle finder to figure that one out. And I'm going to split that angle in half. So I've just got my blade set to about 4.5 degrees here. And you can see when I cut both of those pieces with a 4.5 degree angle, then when I butt them up against one another, I have my total 9 degree angle. And since I'm using the same piece of walnut, that grain flows through everything, and I just think that's a nice little touch. I'm using some aviation snips to cut this. This is definitely not the right tool for the job. You should be using, a hacksaw or something at least. It'll cut it a lot better. And I'm going to glue in another piece of plywood here. This will strengthen this seat up a little bit, and it's also going to help keep it in place. This piece actually fits right inside of the case. You definitely want to wear some sort of mask when you're sanding this thing. These dust particles are pretty harmful. And now I've taken it outside, and I'm going to go ahead and primer it. I'm using this bin primer. It's kind of a heavy build. It'll help fill in some of the imperfections. I still had a couple little spots that I wasn't really happy with, so instead of using that body filler again, I just came back with some regular wood filler. Once I had everything filled in, just gave it a quick sanding, and then you can go ahead and start painting. Now I was only able to find a few cans of this paint, so you're gonna see that I leave the inside not painted. And I had a couple ideas on what I might do here. I was thinking maybe I'd put like some felt or something in there, but it just seemed like I was gonna be a lot of extra work. So what I ended up doing was going to the store and just getting a can of paint mixed up to match. And I go ahead and brush that on a little later. I'll go ahead and trim the pieces for the top to their final size. And I'm just rounding over the outside edges here. You don't need to worry about the edge that the hinge is going to be against. And to get the hinge aligned properly, I flip this piece over and then I push the hinge all the way down, so when it's flipped back over, the hinge will line up perfectly with the top of this piece. I just take a couple extra moments just to make sure I've got everything lined up perfectly here. And now I'm just going to use a little bit of CA glue to temporarily hold this hinge together. And once it cures, then I can go ahead and just put a couple screws in it. Then I'll remove it, put the rest of the screws in. Now I'm just laying out a line 3/8 of an inch from the edge, and I lay out a couple spots where I want these screws to be. And I'm going to start drilling these holes by using a Forstner bit. And that's going to give me a nice recessed area that I can come back and plug later. And this dowel is actually a piece of poplar. It's just really dark and it matches the walnut really well. But you can see it's got a little tint of green in it. And I use a little bit of CA glue to hold it in. Once it's dry, I'll trim it off with this pole saw, and then I use a chisel to kind of knock as much extra material off the top before I go ahead and sand them flat. Put a little bit of oil on the walnut plywood just to bring out the grain. And then I'm going to use this scuff pad. This is a really light scuff pad just to kind of knock down any bumps on the whole thing. You can use it on the painted plywood, the unpainted plywood, all over the place. And then I'll coat the whole thing with polyurethane. And I ended up doing 2 coats of this. And here I am just brushing on the rest of this paint. This ended up being a pretty good match. I'm pretty happy with this. I use this anti-fatigue mat just to have something in the bottom where your feet go. Figured it would get kicked and scratched and start looking kind of bad over time. And this should prevent that from happening. And I also just put a piece of shelf liner inside the desk too. Just used a little bit of spray glue to hold it in place. That's about it. Thanks for watching. Like I said, I'll put plans on my website. big thank you to these guys here for supporting me on Patreon. I really appreciate it. If you guys have any questions, please leave a comment down below. I always try to get back to everybody. Really appreciate a thumbs up on the video if you liked it. And if you haven't already done so, it would be great if you subscribe to the channel. If you're looking for a little more advanced plywood furniture build, check out this next video.